Imagine this: the warm glow of birthday candles, the murmur of happy wishes, 8 months into a cherished pregnancy. And then, in a heartbeat, the icing isn't just on the cake, it's a weapon, and the laughter isn't celebratory, it's cruel. This is the story of Eleanor Ainsworth, a woman whose carefully constructed world was shattered in the most public and humiliating way imaginable, on a day that should have been filled with joy. It's a journey that begins with a shocking act of betrayal that rips through the fabric of a marriage and a family, leaving devastation in its wake, that feeling when a moment meant for joy becomes a defining scar. We all hope it never happens to us. But what if it did? Eleanor's experience will take us through the harrowing depths of such a betrayal, exploring not just the pain, but the unexpected strength that can be found when everything falls apart. We'll touch upon the devastating impact of infidelity in its rawest form, witness the incredible resilience of the human spirit, and discover how life's most painful moments can, astonishingly, become catalysts for profound and empowering transformation. What does it take to piece a life back together when it's been so publicly shattered? Before we dive into the heart of Eleanor's journey, let me share how a day anticipated with such joy could curdle into a nightmare so suddenly, so completely. Section 2. The air in the private oak room at the Willow Creek Inn fairly shimmered with anticipation, a perfect picture of love and impending parenthood, or so it seemed on that mild Ohio evening. Eleanor Ainsworth, just weeks shy of her 33rd birthday and a radiant 8 months pregnant, felt a profound sense of contentment. After years of hoping, of quiet prayers whispered into the night, their baby, a little girl they already thought of as Sophia, was finally, wonderfully on her way. The journey to this point hadn't been without its challenges. The persistent morning sickness of the first trimester had given way to the careful dietary restrictions of gestational diabetes in the second. But Eleanor, a woman whose optimism was as steadfast as her love for her husband, Gregory, had navigated it all with a determined grace. She had poured her heart into every detail of the nursery, choosing soft, calming colors and carefully selecting each tiny outfit, each gentle toy. This baby was the culmination of so many dreams. Her sister, Catherine, or Kate as everyone called her, had insisted on this birthday celebration. Eleanor, feeling the familiar fatigue of late pregnancy, had initially protested. Honestly, Kate, she'd said, a quiet evening at home sounds like heaven. But Kate, ever the loving pragmatist, wouldn't hear of it. Nonsense. Kate had responded firmly, her eyes warm with affection. You deserve to be celebrated, especially now. Let people show you how much they care. This is a milestone. And so, Eleanor had relented, touched by her sister's insistence and the thought of sharing this special time with loved ones. She'd chosen her dress with care, a deep navy blue maternity gown that flowed gracefully over her burgeoning belly, a splurge that made her feel beautiful despite the inevitable aches and the slight swelling in her ankles. Gregory had been distant lately, more so than usual. He'd blamed it on stress at Sterling and Vance Capital Partners, long hours working on a new investment portfolio, and Eleanor, wanting to believe him, wanting to protect the bubble of happiness surrounding Sophia's imminent arrival, had mostly pushed her quiet unease aside. Tonight, though, he seemed more attentive, more like the man she had married 7 years ago. He helped her into the car with a tenderness that soothed some of her lingering anxieties, his hand resting gently on her arm as they walked into the Willow Creek Inn. The private oak room had been transformed. Soft silver and gold decorations hung artfully, catching the light, and a banner proclaiming "Happy Birthday." Eleanor stretched across one wall. About 30 guests mingled, their voices a low, happy hum. Colleagues from her part-time library job, a few cherished neighborhood friends, her parents, Helen and Henry Peterson, beaming with pride, and several of Gregory's friends from his firm. This particular group, a boisterous alpha male contingent, had always made Eleanor slightly uncomfortable with their loud jokes and what she privately termed their perpetual boys' club mentality. But tonight, even their presence couldn't dim her quiet joy. Kate had outdone herself. A magnificent 3-tiered cake, adorned with delicate fondant flowers that perfectly matched the nursery theme Eleanor had so lovingly chosen, sat as the centerpiece. As the evening progressed, laughter flowed as easily as the sparkling cider Eleanor sipped. She felt a surge of warmth, despite the exhaustion that was beginning to settle deep in her bones. This was her life, carefully built, lovingly tended, that fleeting shadow of Gregory's recent distance, the way his eyes sometimes seemed to look right through her. Surely just pressure from the firm. Tonight, he was here, by her side. Later, as dessert plates were cleared, Gregory clinked his glass, a familiar gesture to gather everyone's attention. A hush fell over the room. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced, his voice carrying easily. Eleanor stood beside him, a soft blush rising on her cheeks as all eyes turned to her. She gently cradled her belly, feeling Sophia give a little flutter, as if acknowledging the moment. "To my beautiful wife, Eleanor, on her special day," Gregory began, his gaze meeting hers. "Darling, you are absolutely glowing. I am the luckiest man alive to have you as my wife. And soon," he paused, his hand moving to rest on her belly, "the mother of our child." A chorus of "To Eleanor" and "Hear, hear" echoed through the room as glasses were raised. Eleanor's heart swelled. This was it. This was the happiness she had longed for. Yet, as she looked into Gregory's eyes, Kate, standing slightly off to the side, noticed something. A flicker, almost imperceptible, of, what was it, not nervousness, exactly. Something guarded, a brief, almost subconscious glance towards the main door of the oak room before his smile settled back into place, a little too perfectly. Kate frowned inwardly but pushed the fleeting thought away. It was Eleanor's night. What no one in that room knew, what Eleanor herself couldn't have possibly fathomed, was that Gregory's words, so full of seeming love and admiration, were a masterpiece of deception. As he spoke of luck and impending fatherhood, he was desperately trying to hold together the crumbling edifice of a double life, a secret that was mere moments away from exploding with catastrophic force. It's strange, isn't it, how sometimes the brightest lights can cast the darkest shadows, just out of view, waiting for the slightest tremor to reveal themselves. And the tremor was coming, just as the silver cake knife, a family heirloom that had belonged to their grandmother, was poised for the first cut. The door to their private world in the oak room burst open, and a woman in a fiery red dress strode in, shattering the peace like a hurled stone. She was a stranger to Eleanor, younger perhaps, with glossy dark hair cascading past her shoulders and a confidence that bordered on arrogance as her gaze swept the room. The cheerful chatter died instantly, replaced by a sudden, uncomfortable silence, punctuated only by the sharp click of the woman's high heels against the polished hardwood floor. Eleanor felt Gregory's hand, which had been resting over hers on the cake knife, go rigid. A quick glance at his face revealed it had drained of all color. A cold knot of dread began to tighten in Eleanor's stomach. Well, don't let me interrupt your perfect family moment," the woman said, her voice dripping with a sarcasm so thick it was almost tangible. She advanced further into the room, her eyes, like chips of ice, fixed not on Eleanor, but on Gregory. Eleanor looked from the stranger to her husband, confusion clouding her features. "Gregory, who is this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Before Gregory could muster a response, or perhaps before he could formulate another lie, the woman continued her deliberate approach until she stood directly across the beautifully decorated cake table from them. "I'm Brenda," she announced, her lips curling into a smirk, though her eyes, burning with a strange mixture of triumph and fury, remained locked on Gregory. "Brenda Carlyle. Ask your husband, Eleanor. Ask him who I am." Gregory finally seemed to find his voice, or at least a sliver of it. He stepped forward, attempting to position himself, however ineffectually, between the two women. "Brenda, this isn't the place," he said, his tone low, urgent. "Please, leave." Brenda laughed, a harsh, grating sound devoid of any genuine humor. "Not the place," she echoed, her voice rising. "Is that what you told me when you were in my bed last night? Gregory, this isn't the place." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Last night, Eleanor's mind reeled. He'd said he was working late, a final push on the Sterling and Vance quarterly reports. Her hand instinctively flew to her burgeoning belly, a protective gesture for her unborn child. "Gregory!" Eleanor's voice trembled now, the icy dread spreading, chilling her to the bone. What is she talking about? He remained frozen, a statue of guilt, offering no defense, no denial. His silence was a deafening confirmation. In that instant, the room tilted for Eleanor. Words like mistress, lies. Last night, they were like shards of glass embedding themselves in her heart, each one twisting deeper than the last. Brenda's predatory gaze finally shifted from Gregory, landing squarely on Eleanor, taking in her swollen belly with an expression of obvious disdain. "He's been promising to leave you for 6 months. Sweetheart," Brenda sneered, the endearment a deliberate cruelty. 6 months, even after he found out about the baby. Her lip curled in disgust. "He told me it wasn't his, not his." The words were a faint echo from Eleanor, the world dissolving around her. 6 months. Their precious Sophia had been conceived 8 months ago. The math was horrifyingly simple. Gregory had started this affair, this betrayal, shortly after learning he was going to be a father, the man who had just toasted her, spoken of her glow, of his luck. It was all a lie, a monstrous, calculated performance. "Is this true, Gregory?" she managed to ask, though the answer was already screaming in the hollows of his stricken face. Brenda didn't wait for Gregory's response, perhaps knowing none would be forthcoming. In one swift, shocking motion, she reached forward, her manicured hand grabbing the top tier of the beautiful birthday cake, Sophia's nursery-themed cake, and with a guttural cry of rage, hurled it directly at Eleanor. The cake hit Eleanor square in the chest, the impact stealing her breath. Frosting and cake splattered across her face, into her hair, down the front of the navy blue maternity dress she'd felt so beautiful in just moments before. Chunks of sponge and buttercream slid slowly, obscenely, down her pregnant belly, leaving sticky, humiliating trails. "Now you look as pathetic as you actually are," Brenda spat, her chest heaving, for 3 excruciating, heart-stopping seconds. The room was utterly silent. Eleanor stood motionless, cake dripping from her eyelashes, the sheer, unadulterated humiliation of the moment surpassing even the initial shock of learning about her husband's profound betrayal. Then, from the corner table where Gregory's work colleagues from Sterling and Vance sat, a snicker broke the silence. Just one, at first. Then it turned into a low chuckle, which seemed to give permission for others to join in. Within moments, several guests, mostly Gregory's friends, Eleanor noted with a sickening clarity, were laughing, some, perhaps, from genuine, cruel amusement, others from the sheer uncomfortable tension of the situation. But the sound, to Eleanor, was uniform. It was the sound of her world collapsing, of her dignity being shredded. Dear God, the laughter. Through cake-smeared eyes, Eleanor looked around the room, her gaze sweeping over the laughing faces, her heart constricting with each one. Then, her eyes found Gregory. She looked at him, a silent, desperate plea etched on her frosting-covered face. "Do something. Say something. Defend me, your wife, the mother of your child." But Gregory remained paralyzed, a deer caught in the headlights of his own making, trapped between his wife and his mistress. Saying nothing, doing nothing, he simply stood there, his handsome face a mask of horrified inaction. As his wife, 8 months pregnant with his child, endured the most public and degrading humiliation imaginable. Is this real? How can the man who vowed to protect me stand by and let this happen? And why are they laughing? It was a betrayal so complete, so devastating, it would carve a wound deeper than any other. As the last echoes of mocking laughter died, abruptly choked off by a new, more terrifying sound, a pain far sharper than any humiliation ripped through Eleanor. It wasn't just the sticky mess of frosting or the burning shame. This was a visceral, internal agony. Her breath hitched. She gasped, her hands instinctively flying to her belly, clutching it as if to shield Sophia from this fresh onslaught. A low moan escaped her lips, Only Kate, Eleanor's fiercely loyal sister, seemed to register the shift immediately. While others were still processing the grotesque spectacle, or perhaps belatedly feeling a twinge of guilt, Kate was already moving. She had rushed to Eleanor's side, grabbing napkins from a nearby table, her face a mask of fury as she glared at the still smirking faces in Gregory's contingent. "What is wrong with all of you?" Kate had shouted, her voice cutting through the lingering, uncomfortable silence. A silence now thick with a dawning, sickening realization that this was more than just a sordid domestic drama. Seeing her sister, smeared with cake, her beautiful navy dress ruined, her face a mask of shock and betrayal, had ignited a cold fury in Kate. But as she reached Eleanor, attempting to gently wipe away the sticky confection, Eleanor suddenly cried out again, a sharper, more desperate sound. She doubled over, her face contorting not just with emotional anguish, but with intense physical pain. "Something's wrong," Eleanor whispered, her voice strained, her eyes wide with a new, terrifying fear. The baby. The events that followed unfolded in a terrible, swift cascade, each moment more shocking than the last. The remaining laughter died instantly, replaced by gasps of alarm. Beneath the smears of cake and frosting on Eleanor's dress, a darker stain began to spread. Her water had broken, nearly a month before her due date. The emotional and physical stress of the public humiliation, the assault, had likely triggered premature labor, or worse. "Call an ambulance!" Kate screamed, her earlier fury now morphing into sheer panic as she struggled to support her sister, whose knees were suddenly buckling. "Somebody call 911. Guests scrambled for their phones, the festive atmosphere of moments before, now a distant, nightmarish memory. It was only then, as Eleanor sagged against Kate, that Gregory finally seemed to snap out of his stupor. He moved toward his wife, his handsome face now a canvas of belated concern and dawning guilt. "Eleanor, honey, I'm so sorry," he began, his voice fumbling, inadequate, but Eleanor's eyes, though clouded with pain, flashed with a fire that stopped him mid-sentence. "Don't touch me," she hissed through gritted teeth, each word a shard of ice. The rejection was absolute, a definitive severing. Brenda Carlyle, who had been watching the initial fallout of her cake-throwing stunt with a sort of vindictive satisfaction, now looked on with growing horror. This, clearly, was not part of her script. The dramatic confrontation, the shaming of her lover's wife, yes, but a medical emergency, the potential harm to an unborn child. Her face paled, the confidence she had displayed so brazenly moments before evaporated, replaced by a dawning understanding of the catastrophic consequences of her actions. Without another word, as chaos erupted around Eleanor, Brenda backed slowly towards the door of the oak room, then turned and fled, disappearing as quickly as she had arrived, leaving behind a wake of devastation. Within minutes, that stretched into an eternity for Kate. The wail of sirens grew louder, culminating in the arrival of paramedics from the local Ohio emergency services. They moved with practiced efficiency, assessing Eleanor's critical condition, the signs of premature labor, the evident distress, as they carefully lifted her onto a stretcher, preparing to rush her to City Central Hospital. Eleanor's trembling hand reached out, her fingers desperately clutching Kate's. "Don't leave me," she whispered, her voice weak, laced with fear. "I won't," Kate promised, her own voice choked with emotion, squeezing her sister's hand tightly. "Not ever. I'm right here. Elle." She climbed into the ambulance beside her sister, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, her mind a whirl of fear and protective rage. This wasn't just an affair revealed in a shockingly cruel way. This was an assault, a violent act that had pushed her sister, her pregnant sister, to the brink. The ride to City Central Hospital was a blur of flashing lights, the urgent sounds of medical equipment, and the low, concerned voices of the paramedics. Eleanor was fading in and out of consciousness, moaning softly, her body trembling. Kate held her hand, murmuring words of reassurance she wasn't sure she believed herself, her gaze fixed on Eleanor's pale, pain-etched face. The vibrant, joyful woman from earlier in the evening was gone, replaced by this fragile, suffering figure. Can a marriage, a life, survive such a profound and public rupture? especially when a new life, Sophia's precious life, now hung so precariously in the balance Kate could only pray. The sterile silence of the City Central Hospital waiting room was a stark contrast to the chaos of the Willow Creek Inn, yet it thrummed with its own agonizing tension, a silent battlefield where blame and fear waged war. Eleanor had been rushed immediately into the emergency department, and then, as the severity of her condition became clear, whisked away to the labor and delivery wing, leaving her family adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Kate sat numbly, replaying the horrific events in her mind, each detail a fresh stab of pain. Her parents, Helen and Henry Peterson, had arrived shortly after being called, their faces etched with a mixture of disbelief and dawning terror. Helen wept quietly into a handkerchief, her shoulders shaking, while Henry, a man usually known for his gentle demeanor, paced the small room like a caged lion, his expression stony. His little girl, Eleanor, the one he'd sworn to always protect, now lay somewhere in this vast hospital, fighting for her life and the life of her baby, all because of that man. The word son-in-law felt like ash in Henry's mouth. He had welcomed Gregory Ainsworth into their family, had trusted him with his daughter's happiness, had looked forward to becoming a grandfather to Gregory's child. Now, all he felt was a cold, deep rage, a father's protective fury that simmered just beneath his stoic surface. He refused to even look at Gregory, who had followed the ambulance in his own car and now stood awkwardly near the waiting room entrance. His expensive suit rumpled, his face haggard with what looked like worry and guilt. But to Henry, it was too little, too late. Gregory made a hesitant move towards them, his voice low. "Helen, Henry, there's no excuse for what happened. I just want you to know." Henry stopped pacing and turned, his voice dangerously quiet. "You want us to know what, Gregory? That you betrayed our daughter, that you stood by while that woman assaulted her, that you allowed your friends to laugh at her humiliation. Save your breath. The only thing we want to know right now is if Eleanor and the baby are going to be okay." His words were like chips of ice, each one a carefully aimed blow. Gregory recoiled as if physically struck and retreated to a corner, isolated by their palpable grief and contempt. Kate, meanwhile, had been furiously typing on her phone. When Gregory had approached her earlier, a desperate plea in his eyes, she had looked up with such venom that he'd visibly flinched. "What are you doing?" he'd asked, nodding at her phone, his voice barely a whisper. Kate had turned the screen towards him. On it was a video, already queued up, playing footage she had been recording during the birthday toast and what should have been the joyous cake cutting. The video clearly showed Brenda Carlisle's dramatic entrance, her venomous accusations, the shocking moment of the cake being hurled at Eleanor, and most damningly, the cruel laughter that had followed, Gregory's colleagues, clear as day, and his own complete, utter failure to defend his pregnant wife. "I was recording what I thought would be a sweet birthday memory. Gregory," Kate had said, her voice low and dangerous, each word precise. "Instead, I captured exactly who you are, who your friends are, who that woman is." Gregory's face had paled further. "Kate, please, you can't. I've already sent a copy to Eleanor's lawyer, the one she consulted a few months ago when she first started suspecting you were up to something but couldn't prove it." Kate cut him off, her eyes blazing. "And if anything, and I mean anything, happens to my sister or that baby, I will personally make sure this video is seen by every single person you know, every client at Sterling and Vance, every news outlet in Ohio. Your life as you know it will be over." Before Gregory could respond, his face a mask of dawning horror, a doctor in surgical scrubs entered the waiting room. Everyone turned towards him, the simmering family conflict momentarily suspended by a collective wave of concern for Eleanor and her unborn child. The doctor's expression was grave. "Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, I'm Dr. Ramirez, the attending obstetrician. We've stabilized Eleanor for now, but she's in a critical condition." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The emotional and physical trauma she experienced appears to have triggered a placental abruption. That's a serious condition where the placenta prematurely detaches from the uterine wall. She's experiencing significant hemorrhaging. Helen gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, a fresh wave of sobs racking her body. Henry put a supportive arm around her, though his own face was ashen. "We're doing everything we can," Dr. Ramirez continued, his voice calm but firm. "But both mother and baby are in distress. We need to perform an emergency cesarean section immediately to give them both the best chance." "Oh, my God," Helen whispered, clinging to her husband. Henry finally spoke, his voice hoarse, addressing Gregory directly for the first time with a chilling pronouncement. "If anything happens to them, Ainsworth, you'll answer to me." The threat hung heavy in the air. As the doctor turned to leave, instructing a nurse to prepare Eleanor's family for the necessary consent forms, Kate turned to Gregory one final time, her earlier fire now a cold, hard certainty. "This is on you, Gregory," she said, her voice flat. "All of it." Behind the swinging doors of the operating theater, Eleanor lay conscious but sedated, the bright overhead lights a blur. She could hear the urgency in the medical team's voices, phrases like blood pressure dropping, fetal distress, cutting through the fog of medication and pain. A part of her knew she should be terrified, but a strange detachment had settled over her, as if she were watching these catastrophic events unfold from a great distance. Sometimes, the truth has a way of finding the light, doesn't it? Even in our most private shames. And Gregory's shame, and the shame of those who laughed, was about to find a very public spotlight, as Kate, true to her word, with a few strategic clicks, began to ensure the video found its way into the wider world. Through a haze of pain and fear, a new, fierce love pierced Eleanor's consciousness as a tiny, fragile life was placed on her chest, even as the life Gregory knew began to publicly disintegrate with breathtaking speed. The emergency C-section at City Central Hospital had been fraught with tension. Eleanor, drifting in and out of awareness, heard the urgent calls of the surgical team, the beeping of monitors, the clinking of instruments, sounds that seemed to come from a distant, underwater world. She remembered someone, an anesthesiologist perhaps, encouraging her. "Stay with us, Eleanor. Your baby needs you to be strong." And those words, "your baby," had become her anchor, the one point of light in the terrifying darkness. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she heard it, a small, reedy cry, her baby, her Sophia. A wave of emotion so profound it almost buckled her, even in her sedated state, washed through her. Tears, different from the ones of humiliation and betrayal shed earlier, streamed down her temples and into her hair. These were tears of overwhelming relief, of primal love, of a fierce protective instinct that roared to life within her. A nurse, her face kind above her surgical mask, gently placed a tiny, swaddled bundle onto Eleanor's chest. "A beautiful baby girl, Eleanor," she said softly. 5 pounds, 3 ounces. She's a fighter. This one." Eleanor gazed down at her daughter. Sophia's eyes were closed, her tiny features perfect in their miniature form, a cap of dark, downy hair peeking out from under the hospital beanie. All the betrayal, all the humiliation, the cruelty of Gregory and his friends, the venom of Brenda Carlyle, it all faded for a precious, incandescent moment. Here was Sophia, her daughter, a reason to fight, a reason to live, a tiny, perfect anchor in the raging storm of her life. "Hello, little one," Eleanor whispered, her voice hoarse, her heart overflowing. "I'm your mom." The connection was instantaneous, a bond forged in trauma but radiating an unbreakable strength. While Eleanor was experiencing these first sacred moments with Sophia, who was soon whisked away to the neonatal intensive care unit for oxygen support due to her premature birth, a very different drama was unfolding for Gregory Ainsworth. He had paced the waiting room, tormented by guilt and a growing sense of dread, until a surgeon finally emerged. The baby, a girl, had been delivered. She was premature but doing okay in the NICU. Eleanor, however, had experienced significant hemorrhaging and was in critical condition. The next 24 hours would be crucial. When Gregory moved to follow Eleanor's parents, Helen and Henry Peterson. As they were led towards the NICU to see their granddaughter, Henry had blocked his path, his face a mask of cold fury. "You've done enough," Henry had said, his voice low and menacing. "Stay away from my daughter, and stay away from my granddaughter." The words were a definitive banishment. Gregory, numb and shattered, didn't argue. He sank back into a waiting room chair, utterly alone. It was there, in the sterile quiet of the hospital in the early hours of the morning, that his phone began to explode. The video Kate had taken, the one she had threatened to release, was no longer a private matter between them or their lawyers. It had hit the internet, first shared among a small circle. It quickly gained traction, picked up by local Ohio bloggers, then shared on larger social media platforms. The title alone was enough to guarantee clicks. Mistress attacks pregnant wife at birthday party. Husband does nothing. The footage was raw, shocking, and deeply disturbing. By sunrise, it was going viral. Just as for Eleanor began trending, Gregory sat in the hospital parking lot. The notifications on his phone a relentless barrage. Texts from horrified colleagues at Sterling and Vance who'd seen the video. Missed calls from his increasingly distraught parents. Emails from clients demanding explanations. Then, the call he'd been dreading. Mr. Walter Sterling, the founding partner of Sterling and Vance, his voice like chips of ice. "Ainsworth, my office, 8 a.m., sharp. The executive committee is convening an emergency meeting regarding your situation." There was no room for discussion. The meeting was brutal. The viral video was playing on a large screen as Gregory walked in. His colleagues, the same ones who had snickered at Eleanor's humiliation, now looked at him with a mixture of disgust and fear for their own association with him. "Mr. Sterling was succinct. The firm's reputation is taking an unprecedented hit. Clients are calling, furious. We have no choice but to place you on immediate, indefinite leave, pending a full investigation. Frankly, Ainsworth, I don't see how you can recover from this professionally, at least not with us." His career, built over a decade, was crumbling before his eyes. Brenda Carlisle, he soon learned, had also been placed on leave from her position at the firm, and her only communication with him was a hysterical, sobbing phone call in which she blamed him entirely for ruining her life, screaming that he'd lied to her about his marriage being over. It's a stark reminder, perhaps, that our actions don't just impact us, they ripple outwards, touching everything and everyone we know, often with devastating consequences. As Eleanor held the thought of her newborn daughter close, a tiny beacon of hope, Gregory was beginning to understand the true magnitude of his betrayal, not just as a husband, but as a man whose choices had unleashed a whirlwind of destruction. The contrast couldn't have been more profound, a new life beginning, filled with a mother's fierce love, while another life, built on deceit, was spectacularly self-destructing. The hospital doors of City Central slid open, not to the life Eleanor Ainsworth had envisioned even a week prior, but to a future utterly rewritten, a path she'd have to navigate one fragile step at a time, with baby Sophia cradled carefully in her arms. After a week of intensive care for Eleanor and careful monitoring for little Sophia in the NICU, a week where Sophia, despite her premature arrival, demonstrated a remarkable resilience, quickly graduating from oxygen support to breathing entirely on her own. They were finally being discharged. The physical wounds from Eleanor's emergency C-section were healing, slowly but surely, according to her doctors. The emotional wounds, they knew, would take much longer. Kate was there, a steadfast presence, her car waiting to take them, not to a home filled with a loving husband's support, but to a house that now felt more like a monument to a shattered life. Susan Chandler, Eleanor's closest friend since their college days in Columbus, had also taken time off work, her quiet strength a comforting balm. Seeing Eleanor, so pale and visibly thinner, yet with a new, almost fierce determination in her eyes as she held tiny Sophia, Susan felt a surge of profound protectiveness and admiration. This wasn't just about recovering from a traumatic birth or a public humiliation. This was about Eleanor beginning the monumental task of rebuilding her sense of safety, her trust in the world, and ultimately her own identity. The ride from City Central Hospital was mostly silent. Eleanor gazed out the window at the passing Ohio cityscape, the familiar streets looking somehow different, sharper, as if a veil had been lifted, or perhaps it was she who had changed. Her perception of everything irrevocably altered by the seismic shifts in her life. Sophia slept peacefully in her new car seat, oblivious to the turmoil that had preceded her arrival into the world. Kate had already arranged for Gregory to remove his belongings from the house they had once shared. He had, according to Kate, complied without argument, leaving the keys with her. Walking into the house felt strange, surreal. It was quiet, too quiet. The air hung heavy with unspoken words, with the ghosts of laughter and dreams that now seemed to belong to another lifetime. Susan, with her gentle efficiency, helped Eleanor settle Sophia into the portable bassinet they'd set up in the living room, then began to unpack the few things Eleanor had brought home from the hospital. Kate made tea, her movements practical, her presence a silent promise of unwavering support. The nursery, the room Eleanor had poured so much love and anticipation into, was the hardest to enter. Every carefully chosen detail, from the hand-painted mural of woodland creatures to the rocking chair where she had imagined nursing Sophia in the quiet hours of the night, was now a poignant reminder of what had been so cruelly taken. Yet, as she stood in the doorway, Sophia asleep in her arms, a new resolve began to solidify within her. This room would not be a shrine to her pain, it would be Sophia's sanctuary, and by extension, her own. In the days that followed, Eleanor moved through a fog of new motherhood, physical recovery, and emotional processing. There were moments of overwhelming sadness, of tears shed into Sophia's soft baby blankets when the weight of Gregory's betrayal felt too heavy to bear. There were moments of intense anger, a cold fury at the injustice of it all. But threaded through it all was a growing sense of clarity. She had been a victim of circumstance, yes, but she would not remain a victim in spirit. Her friend Susan was a rock, anticipating needs before Eleanor even voiced them. A warm meal, an hour to herself, while Susan watched Sophia, a listening ear without judgment. Kate handled practicalities, fielding calls, running errands, acting as a fierce gatekeeper against any unwanted intrusions. Eleanor's parents, Helen and Henry, visited daily, their initial shock giving way to a quiet, steady support, their love for their daughter and new granddaughter a healing presence. It was during that first week home, while Sophia napped and the house was quiet, that Eleanor made the call she knew she had to make. She dialed the number for Ms. Diana Hayes of Hayes Legal Group, the highly respected divorce attorney Kate had urged her to consult months earlier when the first whispers of doubt about Gregory's fidelity had surfaced. Ms. Hayes had been understanding then, offering advice but respecting Eleanor's desire to try and save her marriage. Now, the situation was unequivocally different. Ms. Hayes, it's Eleanor Ainsworth, she said, her voice surprisingly firm, clearer than she'd felt in days. We spoke a few months ago. I need to proceed with a divorce, and I need to discuss a restraining order against a Ms. Brenda Carlyle. There was a brief pause on the other end. Then Ms. Hayes's calm, professional voice. Mrs. Ainsworth, Eleanor, I remember, I saw the news reports. I am so deeply sorry for what you've endured. Of course. Can you come in later this week? Yes, Eleanor said, looking at the sleeping form of her daughter. My priority is Sophia's safety and her stability, and mine. When the life you planned is gone, how do you even begin to sketch the outlines of a new one? For Eleanor, it started with that phone call, a decisive act of self-preservation, a clear statement that she was taking back control of her story, one painful, determined step at a time. The path ahead was daunting, uncertain, but she would not walk it as Gregory Ainsworth's humiliated wife. She would walk it as Eleanor Ainsworth, Sophia's mother, a woman discovering a strength she never knew she possessed. The polished tables of law offices often reflect faces etched with pain. And for Eleanor Ainsworth and her estranged husband, Gregory, those reflections now showed two people on opposite sides of a chasm carved by betrayal, a chasm that was about to be legally defined. Eleanor, with Kate by her side for moral support. sat in the calm, tastefully appointed office of Ms. Diana Hayes at Hayes Legal Group. Ms. Hayes, a woman in her late 50s with a sharp intellect and an empathetic demeanor, listened intently as Eleanor recounted the events of that horrific birthday party and the subsequent birth of Sophia. This wasn't just another divorce case for Ms. Hayes. The public nature of the humiliation, the clear endangerment of a pregnant woman, and the blatant cruelty involved struck a chord. Eleanor needed not just a keen legal mind, but also a protective shield against further trauma. Given the circumstances, Eleanor, Ms. Hayes began, her voice both professional and kind, we are in a strong position. The video Kate so astutely recorded, while Ohio is a no-fault divorce state, will undoubtedly be influential regarding property division and, crucially, custody arrangements for Sophia. What are your primary objectives? Eleanor took a steadying breath. Sophia sleeping peacefully in her carrier beside her chair. Financial security for Sophia and myself. Ms. Hayes, primary physical custody. I want to be the one making the day-to-day decisions for her, though I won't keep Gregory from his daughter entirely, assuming he demonstrates he can be a responsible parent. And I want the house. I designed every inch of that nursery. I brought Sophia home there. I can't bear the thought of leaving it. Ms. Hayes nodded, a small, approving smile touching her lips. All entirely reasonable requests. Eleanor, we will file for a temporary order of protection against Ms. Carlisle immediately, based on the assault. We'll also petition for temporary custody and child support, and make our claim for the marital home clear from the outset. She exuded a quiet confidence that was immensely reassuring to Eleanor. She wasn't just a victim anymore, she was a woman with a plan, with formidable legal backing, across town, in a significantly less opulent office at Davenport & Associates. Gregory Ainsworth faced his own attorney, Mr. Frank Davenport. Davenport was an older, more world-weary lawyer, a man who had seen every conceivable shade of marital discord in his long career. He didn't mince words. Gregory, Mr. Davenport said, his tone blunt after reviewing the viral video and the initial correspondence from Hayes Legal Group. Your position is not strong. To be frank, it's about as weak as it gets. The video is damning. It shows infidelity, public humiliation, and behavior that clearly endangered your wife and child. You've lost your job at Sterling and Vance as a direct result. This narrative is incredibly difficult to counter. Gregory, who had perhaps clung to a sliver of hope that this nightmare could somehow be undone, that Eleanor might eventually forgive him, felt that hope shrivel. So, what do we do? He asked, his voice hollow. I want to see my daughter. I want to try and fix things with Eleanor. Mr. Davenport sighed, a sound of weary resignation. Fixing things with Eleanor, Gregory based on the petition Ms. Hayes is filing, which includes seeking sole use and possession of the marital home and primary custody of Sophia. Reconciliation seems highly unlikely. Our focus now must be on mitigating the damage and securing you reasonable access to your child, and ensuring any financial settlements are based on your current reality, not your former earning capacity. You need to accept that divorce is happening. The finality of those words hit Gregory with the force of a physical blow. He had not only destroyed his marriage and his career, but was now facing the prospect of being a visitor in his own daughter's life, the shame of his actions, the public vilification, the loss of Eleanor's love and respect. It was a heavy, suffocating weight. Ms. Hayes, meanwhile, was outlining the next steps for Eleanor. Mr. Ainsworth has retained Frank Davenport. He's a reasonable man, pragmatic. I anticipate we can negotiate temporary arrangements for a visitation, likely supervised, to begin with, and support while the divorce proceeds. This will provide stability for Sophia, which is our paramount concern. Eleanor nodded, her gaze steady. Supervised is appropriate. After what happened, after he did nothing to protect me, or Sophia, I need to know she's safe with him. Her voice didn't waver. The woman who had been publicly undone was now quietly, firmly dictating the terms of her future. The legal machinery began to turn, petitions were filed, affidavits sworn. the temporary restraining order against Brenda Carlisle was granted swiftly. A preliminary hearing was set to discuss temporary custody and support. It's a hard truth that sometimes the only way forward is through a door marked closure, even if it's a lawyer who has to open it for you. For Eleanor, each legal step, while emotionally taxing, was also a step towards reclaiming her life, towards building a secure future for herself and her daughter, free from the shadow of Gregory's betrayal. For Gregory, each legal document was a stark reminder of all he had irrevocably lost through his own choices. The battle lines were drawn, not with anger and histrionics, but with the cool, precise language of the law, forever altering the landscape of their lives. With the initial legal framework tentatively in place, the delicate, often awkward dance of co-parenting began. Each supervised visit a poignant reminder for Eleanor of what was irrevocably lost, and for Gregory, a stark illustration of the consequences of his actions. For Eleanor, however, each therapy session with Dr. Evelyn Reed became a vital step towards rediscovering who she was becoming in the aftermath of such profound betrayal. Dr. Reed, a compassionate woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice, created a safe space where Eleanor could begin to unpack the layers of trauma, grief, and anger. Eleanor's journey, as Dr. Reed perceived it, was not just about healing from the wounds inflicted by Gregory and Brenda, but about excavating the strong, resilient woman who had perhaps been buried beneath societal expectations, the perceived duties of a wife, and her own quiet, trusting nature. The first few supervised visits between Gregory and baby Sophia took place at Eleanor's home, with Kate acting as the agreed-upon supervisor. These encounters were strained, filled with unspoken tensions. Gregory, stripped of his former confidence and professional standing, he had managed to secure a new, much lower-paying position at a smaller investment firm in a neighboring Ohio town. Grateful for any opportunity to begin rebuilding, was visibly uncomfortable. He fumbled with Sophia's diapers, seemed unsure how to hold her, and constantly looked to Kate for approval or guidance. It was a stark contrast to the suave, assured man Eleanor had married. Kate, ever protective of her sister and niece, maintained a vigilant, almost clinical neutrality, ensuring Gregory adhered strictly to the visitation agreement and offering minimal interaction. Eleanor usually made herself scarce during these visits, retreating to her bedroom, the sound of Gregory's unfamiliar voice cooing at Sophia, a strange and unsettling presence in her home. Meanwhile, in Dr. Reed's warm, sunlit office, Eleanor began to voice the complexities of her emotions. "It's not Gregory I miss, not anymore," she confessed one afternoon, her gaze fixed on a point beyond the window. "The man I loved, or thought I loved, he doesn't exist. He was a fiction he created. The moment he stood by and let that woman, let his friends, laugh, that was the end of him for me." She paused, then continued, her voice softer. "But I grieve, Dr. Reed. I grieve so deeply for the life I thought we would have, the family I imagined, holding Sophia. I see all the milestones we were supposed to share, the joy he's robbed us of, robbed her of, as a united family." Dr. Reed nodded understandingly. "It's a profound loss, Eleanor. The loss of a dream, of a future you had every right to expect. It's important to acknowledge that grief. It's separate from the grief for the man himself. You're mourning the life that was stolen, not the person who stole it." These sessions became Eleanor's lifeline. She learned to identify the triggers that sent spirals of anxiety through her, to practice mindfulness, to reframe the narrative of her victimhood into one of survival, and eventually, of strength. Dr. Reed helped her understand that her anger was a valid response to injustice, but that holding onto it too tightly would ultimately only harm her. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. Gregory, despite his initial awkwardness, started to show a surprising dedication during his supervised visits with Sophia. He began to learn her cues, to anticipate her needs. He'd arrive on time, every time, often with a small, appropriate toy or a new board book for Sophia. He never overstepped, never brought up his relationship with Eleanor, focusing solely on his daughter. Kate reported these small changes to Eleanor with a grudging impartiality. He was better today, she might concede. Actually got Sophia to stop crying by himself. Eleanor, too, was finding a new rhythm. She established a routine for herself and Sophia, filled with quiet moments of bonding, gentle play, and the steady, loving support of Kate, Susan, and her parents. She started taking Sophia for short walks in the nearby park. The fresh Ohio air, a welcome change from the confines of the house that still held so many painful memories. She was beginning to feel less like a shattered reflection and more like a woman carefully piecing herself back together, albeit into a new and unfamiliar pattern. Could it be that this broken road, this unexpected, terrifying detour her life had taken, might eventually lead somewhere unexpected, somewhere she could finally breathe again, not just for Sophia, but for herself? The thought was tentative, fragile, but it was there. A tiny seed of hope planted in the fertile ground of her healing. The path was still long, the scars still tender, but for the first time since that horrific night, Eleanor Ainsworth felt a flicker of something that resembled peace. Section 10. Months later, when the raw edges of pain had begun to soften, and a fragile new normal was taking root in Eleanor Ainsworth's life, an unexpected message arrived. A ghost from that nightmarish birthday party at the Willow Creek Inn, now seeking not to destroy, but to humbly ask for a chance to atone. It was Kate who received it first, a tentative message request on a professional networking site from none other than Brenda Carlisle. Kate's initial reaction was one of fierce protectiveness, a surge of anger at the audacity of the woman who had caused her sister so much suffering. But the message itself was surprisingly subdued, almost contrite. Brenda explained that she had been in intensive therapy, confronting her own destructive patterns and the immense harm she had caused. Part of her recovery process, she wrote, involved making sincere amends to those she had wronged, if they were willing. She asked if Kate thought Eleanor might, under any circumstances, consider meeting with her. Kate immediately called Eleanor, her voice a mixture of disbelief and caution. "You are not going to believe this. She began, and relayed the contents of Brenda's message. Eleanor was momentarily speechless. Brenda Carlisle, the woman whose face was seared into her memory, contorted with rage as she hurled that cake. The woman whose cruel words about Sophia's paternity still echoed in the darkest corners of her mind. The thought of facing her again was, at first, repellent. Why should she give Brenda the satisfaction, the emotional release, of an apology? What could Brenda possibly say that would undo the trauma, the premature birth, the terror? She discussed it with Dr. Evelyn Reed in her next therapy session. "My first instinct is to say no, absolutely not," Eleanor admitted. "Part of me feels like she doesn't deserve the peace of being heard." Dr. Reed listened patiently. "And what does another part of you feel?" Eleanor. Eleanor paused, considering. "There's a flicker of curiosity, I suppose, and maybe a desire to close that specific chapter, not for her sake, but for mine, to see if there's any genuine remorse there, or if it's just self-serving." Dr. Reed nodded. "The decision is entirely yours, Eleanor. There's no right or wrong answer, but sometimes hearing an apology, even if you're not ready to forgive, can be a step in releasing some of the power the event holds over you." After much soul-searching, and with Kate's unwavering promise to be by her side every second, Eleanor agreed. Kate relayed the message back to Brenda. Eleanor would meet, but it would be on her terms, in a neutral public place, with Kate present. The meeting was arranged for a quiet Tuesday morning at the Corner Perk Cafe, a small, unassuming coffee shop in a neighboring Ohio town, deliberately chosen for its anonymity. Eleanor felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach as she and Kate walked in. Brenda was already there, sitting at a small table in the corner, looking markedly different from the aggressively confident woman in the red dress. Today, she was dressed in simple jeans and a muted sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked smaller, somehow, and visibly nervous, her hands fidgeting with a paper napkin. Forgiveness. It's such a complex thing, isn't it? Sometimes it's not for the other person at all, but a gift we give ourselves. a loosening of a painful tie to the past, a reclaiming of our own emotional energy. Eleanor wasn't thinking about forgiveness as she sat down, but she was, perhaps, open to the possibility of understanding, or at least to witnessing accountability. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," Brenda began, her voice low, almost trembling. I honestly wasn't sure you would. Kate made it clear this was a big ask." Eleanor nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "I wasn't sure either, Brenda, but I'm trying to practice what Dr. Reed calls radical openness, being willing to engage with difficult situations instead of just avoiding them." Brenda managed a small, grateful nod. "I've been in therapy too. A lot of it. It turns out I have some pretty significant issues with a lot of things, including seeking validation through destructive relationships." She took a deep breath. "But that's my problem, not yours. That's not why I asked to see you. I wanted to apologize, face to face, for what I did that night." Eleanor remained silent, her gaze steady, waiting. Kate sat beside her, a silent guardian. "What I did," Brenda continued, her eyes welling up, "was inexcusable. There are no words to truly convey how sorry I am. I was angry. I was hurt because Gregory had been lying to me for months, promising to leave you, making me believe your marriage was a sham. And then, suddenly, he was playing the doting husband at your party. But none of that, absolutely none of that, is any justification for physically attacking a pregnant woman, for saying those vile things, for putting you and your baby in such danger. I have had to live with that knowledge, the reality of what I did, every single day since, and it haunts me." "Yes, you have," Eleanor agreed, her voice calm, devoid of accusation but firm with the weight of her own experience. "And I've had to live with the consequences. My daughter, Sophia, was born a month early. She spent her first days in the NICU. We both could have died." Brenda visibly flinched, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know," she whispered, "and there's nothing I can do to change that, or to make it right. All I can say is that I am profoundly, deeply sorry, and I am working every single day to become someone who would never, ever do something so horrible again." After a moment, Eleanor asked quietly, "Can I ask you something, Brenda? When did it start your relationship with Gregory?" Brenda hesitated, then met Eleanor's eyes. "About 6 months before that night, he told me things at home were strained, that you were obsessed with the pregnancy, that he felt invisible. He made me believe your marriage was essentially over in all but name." She looked down. "Later, much later, after everything, he even tried to tell me he wasn't sure Sophia was his." A flash of the old pain crossed Eleanor's features, but her voice remained steady. "That was a lie, Brenda. There was never any question about Sophia's paternity, and the pregnancy was very much planned. We had been trying for over a year." Brenda closed her eyes briefly. "I'm not surprised. He told me a lot of things I later realized were probably lies. Not that it excuses my behavior," she added quickly. "I still chose to believe what I wanted to believe. I chose to act in a way that was unforgivable." The three women sat in silence for a moment. Is it possible that even those who've caused us the deepest pain can find their own path to change? And what does it mean for us if they do? Finally, Eleanor spoke. "I appreciate your apology. Brenda, I truly do. I can't say I forgive you, at least not yet. Forgiveness is a journey, not a destination, but I can say that I hope you find peace and that you learn from this, and I accept that your apology today is sincere." Brenda nodded, tears streaming freely now. That's more than I deserve. Thank you. Thank you for hearing me out." As they prepared to leave, Brenda asked one last hesitant question. How is your daughter Sophia? If you don't mind me asking." For the first time during the encounter, a genuine, soft smile touched Eleanor's lips. "Sophia is amazing," she said, her voice filled with a warmth that transformed her face. "She's strong, she's smart, she's determined. Everything she does fills me with wonder." Brenda returned the smile, cautiously. "She sounds wonderful. I'm glad. I'm truly glad you're both okay. It wasn't absolution, and it wasn't friendship. But for Eleanor, it was another closed door on a painful past, another small step towards her own liberation. 1 year to the day after her world had imploded in a cascade of frosting, betrayal, and public humiliation, Eleanor Ainsworth stood not amidst wreckage, but in a home filled with warm light, genuine laughter, and the sweet scent of a single birthday candle ready to be placed on a small, lovingly decorated cake. It wasn't a celebration of the day itself, but of everything that had risen from its ashes. Sophia, now a bright-eyed, babbling 14-month-old, played happily in her high chair in their cozy Ohio kitchen, banging a wooden spoon on the tray, her delighted giggles a melody that had become the soundtrack of Eleanor's new life. The doorbell chimed, and Eleanor, wiping a smudge of buttercream from her fingers, went to answer it. Kate stood on the porch, arms laden with cheerfully wrapped gifts and a bouquet of bright balloons. "Happy rebirthday," Kate announced with her usual exuberant flourish, stepping inside. Eleanor laughed, a genuine, easy sound that reached her eyes. "You and your rebirthday. Kate, you really didn't need to bring all this." "Of course, I did." That's Kate insisted, depositing her offerings on the dining room table, which was already adorned with a simple, elegant vase of flowers Susan Chandler had dropped off earlier. "Today isn't just any day. It's the anniversary of you officially becoming the incredible, formidable Sarah 2.0, as I like to call it. The version released after extensive, unwanted, but ultimately transformative beta testing." Eleanor rolled her eyes good-naturedly at her sister's dramatic flair. "You're ridiculous, but I love you for it." "Seriously, though." Kate said, her tone softening, her eyes filled with sincere admiration as she helped arrange the small buffet of snacks they'd prepared. "I am so incredibly proud of how you've handled everything this past year. You've been amazing." Before Eleanor had to respond to this heartfelt praise, more guests began to arrive. Susan, of course, and a few other close friends who had formed Eleanor's unwavering support system throughout the incredibly difficult year. Each came bearing not just a small gift or a dish to share, but more importantly, their love, their continued presence, a testament to the bonds that had only strengthened under duress. The house soon filled with a comfortable warmth, easy conversation, and the kind of laughter that heals. Looking at Sophia, her face alight with joy as she smeared a bit of yogurt on her chin, and then at the loving faces of her friends gathered around her table, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet triumph that resonated deep within her soul. The scars were still there, of course, faint tracings on her heart and memory, but they were a part of her story now, not the whole story. They were reminders of battles fought and won, of resilience discovered in the crucible of pain. Later, as she placed the single, slender candle onto the small cake she had baked, a simple vanilla sponge, Sophia's favorite, Eleanor gathered her friends close. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice clear and steady. "A year ago, on this very evening, I truly thought my life was ending. At one point, quite literally. A small, rueful smile touched her lips, acknowledging the terror of that night in the hospital. But instead, she continued, her gaze sweeping over each cherished face, it was just beginning, in a way I could never have imagined, a way I wouldn't have chosen, but a way that has brought me to this." She gestured around the room, at the love, the friendship, the giggling toddler in the high chair. Kate raised her glass of sparkling cider. "To Eleanor, who showed us all what true strength, grace, and resilience look like. To Eleanor." "To Eleanor," the friends echoed, their voices warm, lifting their glasses in a heartfelt toast. Eleanor blushed slightly at the attention, but pressed on. "I've learned so much this past year about resilience. Yes, about the incredible gift of true friendship." Her eyes met Kate's, then Susan's. "About what truly, truly matters." Her gaze drifted to Sophia, who was watching the flickering candle flame with wide, fascinated eyes. "Most of all, I've learned that sometimes what looks like the absolute worst moment of your life, the moment you think you can't possibly survive, can actually be the beginning of something better, something more authentic than you ever dreamed possible. Her divorce from Gregory had been finalized 3 months prior. The proceedings, surprisingly, had been less contentious than Ms. Diana Hayes had initially anticipated. Gregory, perhaps chastened by his public downfall and eager to maintain some semblance of a relationship with Sophia, had agreed to generous terms regarding child support and the division of assets. The house, the one where they had once planned to raise their family together, was now solely Eleanor's. She had repainted several rooms, rearranged furniture, and gradually transformed the space into something that reflected her own taste, her own emerging identity, rather than the quiet compromises of marriage. It was a physical manifestation of the internal renovation she had undergone. Her co-parenting relationship with Gregory had settled into a stable, if strictly businesslike, rhythm. His supervised visits had progressed to unsupervised weekend time, and he had proven to be a surprisingly dedicated, if still somewhat awkward, father. He was reliable, followed her instructions regarding Sophia's care meticulously, and, to Eleanor's immense relief, never brought up their past relationship or attempted any reconciliation. He seemed to understand, finally, that their connection was now solely through their daughter. It was enough. It had to be. It's amazing how the human spirit can not only endure, but find ways to bloom again, even in the most barren soil, isn't it? As Eleanor bent down to blow out the single candle on her rebirth cake, she made a silent wish, not for a new love, or for career success, or for any of the things she might have wished for in her previous life. She wished for continued strength, for continued clarity, and for the wisdom to always cherish the simple, profound joys that now filled her days. Because if the past year had taught her anything, it was that she was capable of weathering storms she once would have thought utterly impossible to survive. The path forward for Eleanor Ainsworth wasn't a return to what was, because that life, that version of herself, no longer existed. Instead, it was an embrace of what could be, a future illuminated by the quiet strength she had forged in the crucible of unimaginable fire. Later that evening, after her friends had departed and little Sophia was sleeping soundly in her crib, Eleanor sat alone on her small patio, the Ohio night air cool and calming, contemplating the stars visible through breaks in the cloud cover. The darkness no longer felt threatening. It felt peaceful, a canvas for new dreams. Eleanor's journey is a testament, isn't it? A testament to the quiet courage it takes to face betrayal head-on, to choose healing over bitterness, and to rebuild a life, not just from the ashes, but with the profound wisdom those ashes provide. She learned, through excruciating experience, that sometimes the greatest act of love is to first love oneself enough to walk away from what breaks you, and then, with patience and grit, to build something beautiful, something true, in its place. Her life was simpler now, quieter, yet infinitely richer. Her focus was clear. Sophia's happiness and well-being, her own continued emotional growth, and cherishing the genuine connections that had sustained her. Just the other day, her phone had chimed with a text message. It was from Daniel Dan Morris, a kind, unassuming single father she had met at Sophia's playgroup at the Little Sprouts Child Care Center. They'd bonded over shared stories of sleepless nights and toddler triumphs. Just checking we're still on for the park playdate tomorrow. His message read, "Logan is very excited to show Sophia his new red truck." Eleanor had smiled as she typed her reply, confirming their plans. Dan was just a friend, a kindred spirit navigating the complexities of single parenthood. Neither of them was looking for, or ready for, anything more. But his easy companionship, the shared laughter, represented possibility. The possibility that someday, when the time was truly right, her heart might open again, not to replace what was lost, but to create something new, something unexpected, built on a foundation of self-awareness and hard-won wisdom. As she prepared for bed that night, Eleanor caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. The woman who gazed back at her was different, profoundly so, from the one who had stood, frosting-covered and humiliated, a year ago. This Eleanor stood straighter, her eyes clearer, her expression more serene, touched with a gentle confidence that came from within. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely. There would likely always be a scar where her heart had been so brutally broken. But it no longer defined her. It was simply a part of her journey, a testament to her capacity to heal. In the nursery, she paused, as she often did, to watch Sophia sleeping peacefully, her tiny chest rising and falling in the soft glow of the nightlight. Whatever else had happened, this perfect, precious child had emerged from the chaos, a radiant beacon of love and hope. And for Sophia, Eleanor could not bring herself to regret any part of the arduous journey that had brought them to this peaceful moment. 1 year ago, a room full of people had laughed as cake dripped down her pregnant belly. They had stopped laughing when she collapsed, when the gravity of their cruelty became terrifyingly apparent in her medical emergency. But in the end, it wasn't their laughter, or even their eventual shame, that mattered. What mattered was that Eleanor Ainsworth had discovered within herself a depth of resilience, a capacity for forgiveness, first of herself, for her own blind trust, and then, in time, a letting go of the bitterness towards others, and an unquenchable joy that no humiliation, no betrayal, could ultimately diminish. She had found her voice, her strength, and her purpose. And that transformation, from victim to survivor, to a woman truly thriving, was indeed worth celebrating, not just with a single candle, but with every breath of her reclaimed life. As she turned out the light, a soft whisper escaped her lips into the quiet darkness. Happy rebirth day to me. Eleanor's journey from public humiliation to personal transformation reminds us, so powerfully, that our darkest moments don't have to define us. It's how we choose to respond to them, the steps we take, however small, towards healing and light, that shape our character and, ultimately, our future. Perhaps you've known moments that tested your own limits, moments that reshaped you in ways you never expected. What are the lessons you've carried forward from your own challenges, those times that forged your own resilience? We'd be honored if you shared your reflections in the comments below. And if stories of the quiet power of the human spirit, of finding strength in adversity, resonate deeply with you, consider subscribing for more journeys like Eleanor's.